Greetings, Theophilus. Okay, so this is the preparation video for our second study in the series Voice of Matthew. We're calling this study the first 4 chapters of his book, The Long-Awaited King for Sure. What we're going to do is see that Matthew, former tax collector, gives a tight accounting of the fact that Jesus fits the bill for being the Jewish Messiah. And the way he does this is interesting. There are 10 backstories, perfect round number, 10. 10 backstories of Jesus that ultimately lead up to chapter 4, verse 17, which is like the debut or the debutante of his public ministry. Every single one of those backstories has an Old Testament passage that is getting fulfilled, or passages, has a notable event, and has some miraculous experience. So we're going to get a sense of that in this study. I'm kind of going through how I'm going to present this in the group. Now, the first study that we did last time was just 1 page. From now on, the studies are going to be 2 pages. On the front, it's going to be pretty much all the zoom in and zoom out. And then you're going to see a box that says today's study is on the back side. So if you want to skip all that zooming in and zooming out for context, you can just turn it to the back and go through the guided action steps. So in action number 1 on the back, the first thing is a simple question is, who did read ahead and got any kind of ahas or epiphany? If no one did that, I would just skip that step and say, all right, I wouldn't try to squeeze water from that rock. On action 2, it says, hey, let's read about Matthew in his own book, because the author records the fact that he was an ugly, nasty tax collector. And I think that says something about the sincerity of the writer. But in action 3, I'm going to especially try to camp out on this piece. Now, when you look at it right away, you're going to see this is the list of genealogies from Abraham all the way to Jesus being born. And it's going to seem maybe at first glance like a really boring thing, but I think it's kind of cool to go through. And so what I'm going to have everybody do is read 5 verses each and then move on to the next person. They're going to read it. And so these are just a bunch of names, and they're not American names. They're Hebrew names. And so probably nobody is going to be able to correctly pronounce the name. So what I do up front is I say, we're going to read these names through, and don't let anybody tell you that there's a correct way of saying it in English, because they're not English names. They're in a different language. I give everybody permission to totally butcher the names as best you can as you're going through this. And for some reason, people say that was a lot of fun. I'm glad we actually read the names. This stuff is always skipped. But then afterwards, the action step asks, what is the patterning that you saw in these names? One is the genealogy does not start all the way back at the beginning of time with like Adam. So Abraham is the first Hebrew, the first Jew. And so we're marching towards the Jewish Messiah, the Hebrew Messiah, remember that. And then that goes all the way to Jesus. And it's in lumps of 14 generations. And that's kind of curious. That'll stand out, that there's 14 generations, boom, boom, boom. And in this action step, there's this kind of fun backstory fact. It's this idea that for the Hebrews, they have this concept we call now, gematria. That if you take the consonants in the Hebrew of people's names and you assign a numeric value to each one of the letters, like A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, then you can add up those consonants to come up with a number for a name. The Hebrews and poets and scripture writers would use this concept, gematria, as sort of a double meaning. Well, all of this genealogy is centered around King David of Israel. And I've got this little chart in there where D, V, and D, Dalet, Vav, and Dalet, it equals to 14. So David is the number 14. And so the fun fact here is that Matthew is kind of playing on this idea that 14 generations and 14 generations and 14 generations. It's kind of like David's coming at you, David's coming at you, David's coming at you, and now we have Jesus. And I don't know how much messaging that will change your life is in that, but it's fun to see that. And it does give you an idea that Matthew is really thinking through how he's going to present this account of Jesus. But then after that first of 10 backstories, is I'm going to say, each person pick one of these other 9 segments where you just read it on your own. And then everybody just takes 1 minute reading their selected piece. You pull everyone into one conversation. You say, okay, you say, which one did you do? Give us a real quick synopsis of what it said. And then the question, did it have all 3 of these elements? And that just accentuates the fact that there is a tight, structured accounting that shows us Jesus really does fit the accounting bill, that he is the promised Jewish Messiah. Action 5 is kind of optional because you might have run out of time by then. Does this 40 units of time in the wilderness without any food, facing temptation, remind you of any Old Testament account that Jesus might be replicating? And what really stands out to me is that in the Exodus, the Israelites spent 40 years in the wilderness, and it's described as a time of trial and testing where the people of Israel succumbed to temptation over and over again. And so what is Jesus doing here in the story? Essentially, Jesus is kind of redoing on behalf of Israel that whole experience. Action 6 is maybe the same question I'll have on most all of the studies in the future. And it's just having had this discussion with each other in the group, every person just give your main takeaway. Okay, that's the study. If you have any recommendations or questions or experiences in the group that you'd love to share, I'd love to hear it. I got that photo that you sent me of the first session that you did with your crew that you gathered in another state across the country in a totally different environment than the one that I'm in. And that was real encouraging to see. And I'm praying for you and all those guys, and you just keep on, all right? Catch you next time. Peace.